learning office about all the reconnection issues and microphone cutting out and all this stuff that we were having problems with. They didn't know of anything specific that would have caused those issues. So the only thing that I can conclude is that at this time of the day, maybe there's a lot of traffic on Blackboard or on Collaborate Ultra in particular, and that's what was causing the issue. Or maybe there's a lot of traffic on the ENMU server at this time of the day. I just don't know. So if you wouldn't mind, assume that I'm talking at all times, and if I suddenly go quiet, someone jump in and give me a yell so that I know to reconnect the microphone. The other thing I had trouble with earlier this week was sharing my screen to a PowerPoint. So instead of doing that, I've got the PowerPoint embedded into the Collaborate classroom. So hopefully that way we won't have problems with it. Okay, so my plan is to go through some notes on some things about the library which will then get repeated and expanded next week for you. Look at some more APA formatting things, and then go back over the rules for the article summary and take a look at the reference for the article summary. I'm about halfway through looking at the reference down to the participants. And the references are a real mix. A couple of people are very close, have done really well. Some people, it doesn't look anything like APA. So I'm going to go through that a little more carefully, and I'll show you, maybe if we have time, I'll show you my model, and then after class I will put my model up and open it up so that hopefully tomorrow I'll get the papers finished. I've also got to do my evaluation file, which is very late. So thankfully I have a nice boss. So I'm hoping that I'll get those finished on Friday, Saturday morning at the latest, and I'll get those back to you. You'll be able to compare them to the model and see. Hopefully that feedback will make some good sense to you. Any questions to start off with? No? Okay, got those smiley faces, how lovely. All right, let me share this PowerPoint then. Here we go. Okay. All right, so we're going to be looking at what constitutes good research. A few more bits about APA, as I said, and then we'll go over the article summary again. And I think I opened the article summary for this week early because someone wanted time to start reading it before class. So if you can't find it, please yell quickly in case I did that wrong. It's always possible. It's been a bit of a frantic week. Oh, that's because you're clicking into the wrong hand, and so you're clicking the wrong button, you silly woman. Okay. All right. So for the work that you're doing for this class, I'm going to put some boundaries on that and say that it's got to be journal articles that you use. In your other classes, they might let you use something like the New York Times or some textbooks or some other items of literature, okay? But as much as possible, when you're writing any papers, you want to try to use what we call peer-reviewed research, peer-reviewed literature. So peer-reviewed literature means that it went through a process. When you submit the article to the journal, the editor initially looks at it and goes, meh, not bad, or don't want it, right? In which case it gets chucked out. If the overall editor goes, okay, not bad, they will send it out to some specialists in the field that the paper's writing about. And that can be anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 people. It's usually 2 or 3. And those people will typically blind review, so you won't know who they are necessarily, although sometimes you can guess by the kinds of comments they're making who it is. But they'll not tell you who the reviewers are. The reviewers will give you a load of feedback. The reviewers will go back to the editor and say, accept it, or accept it but it needs a load of changes, or don't accept it, chuck it out, right? So that's what we mean by peer-reviewed. And even though articles go through peer review, it doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't errors in it. One of the things that I think people outside of academia don't understand is that when you're the editor of a journal or a reviewer for a journal, that's voluntary work, right? So the people that are doing this for us are doing it in their spare time, which as a teacher, so I know a lot of you are teachers, you know spare time's kind of thin on the ground, right? So they're not getting paid for it, they're trying to cram it in around everything else they do. So sometimes they miss things as well, all right? So when you're reading journal articles or anything really, it's okay to be a critical consumer. It's okay to read an article and look at the conclusion and go, huh? Wait a minute, I don't remember any results that gave them the opportunity to come up with that conclusion. And you go back and reread it because you're like, well, it must be a bit daft in the head, right? And I go back and reread it, and I'm like, no, there's definitely no results that lead to that conclusion, right? That's okay. It's okay to do that, all right? Nothing's perfect, and just because it's in print doesn't mean it's perfect, okay? If you're going to use internet materials, you want to be really, really careful of those. Blogs and things like that have no filter on them. People can say whatever they like, true or false. And in our field, it's particularly a problem, I think, because there are so many myths surrounding movement and PE and coaching and athletic training and administration of those kinds of people. I mean, there's just, all these myths out there. So there's a lot of complete and utter nonsense on the internet when it comes to our kind of subjects that we're interested in. So when you're looking to develop your own purpose statement, and I said last week, you want to start thinking about this because it comes around quite quickly. Really try to think about something that A, is of interest, B, really gets you kind of excited to find out what that answer might be. Not that we're going to run the research, but you could run the research, right? So you want this to be as enjoyable as possible. Reading research and literature should be fun, right? Otherwise, you've got a long 2 years ahead of you if this is not a fun process. Okay, so you really want to try and make sure that you're reading things that directly are of interest to you. You know, sometimes in classes, like right now for the article summaries, you're having to read what I'm giving you. But once we get to midterm, you get to read whatever you like. So hopefully you'll forgive me for dictating at the beginning of the semester. But yeah, try to make the whole thing, grad school should be fun, right? You chose to come back. So, you know, make it fun, make it relevant, and make it interesting, and then you'll be able to enjoy the whole process of it. So, both the textbook and the APA manual go into a lot of detail about this idea of peer-reviewed research, peer-reviewed literature, and also how do I decide on the quality of the journal, right? So one of the problems we have right now in academia is that there are a lot of pay-to-publish journals starting up. There are a lot of journals who solicit. I mean, every day in my email box, there are emails from people I've never heard of saying, oh, we'd really love you to write a paper for our journal on astrophysics and the Martians. Like, what? How do they get my name, to start with? And B, yeah, just go away, right? But every now and then, someone pops up who's actually promoting a journal that would maybe be interesting. The problem with those is sometimes they're not peer-reviewed at all. Sometimes they promise you that if you can get the article in within 2 weeks, it will be published within the next, it will be published in the next journal, so like 4 weeks later. That did not go through a very rigorous peer review, okay? Sometimes peer reviews can take months because people are doing them voluntarily, right? So you have to be a little bit wary, and when you are, like I have tenure, so I'm lucky, I'm kind of out of some of that game now, but the people who are working for tenure, the faculty who are working for tenure, have to be especially careful of these kinds of journals that are popping up all over the web, because the people reviewing their file don't take those kinds of journals seriously, and you'll actually get dinged if you publish in one of those. So it's much better to just ignore that and stay on the beaten path, right? It might be a little bit harder and a little bit longer, but it will get you something that's more valuable in the end, okay? I graded this out because we didn't use that article that I'm talking about here, but this is an example of where, even though it was in a good quality peer-reviewed journal, there were some pretty big flaws in an article that I gave out a couple of semesters ago, okay? So, you know, it's just, it happens. It happens. Often what happens is that the authors collected a huge amount of data, and then they broke it up into chunks. So instead of just having one publication, because everyone is under pressure to publish if they want to keep their job, so instead of doing one publication, they chunk the database and they publish 3 publications. But then they don't have to repeat the wheel and keep learning, oh, here are the procedures, right? They can just copy and paste the procedures because the procedures didn't change. But sometimes there's some wiggle room in there, right? And you read it and you're like, this is not the procedure for this set of data, people, right? So things like that slip through the net sometimes. Okay, this is the little bit that will get repeated and will be given a lot more detail next week. Karen Nelson works in the library. She has a master's degree to be the role that she has in the library, and I should know her title and I can't remember it. But she is a superb resource, all right? And I'm not sure, I will talk to her, but I'm not sure that I'm going to ask her to come to class. I do have a lecture from her video from last year, so I may just give you the link to that lecture. Under these circumstances, I'm not sure that asking someone else to come and be in a room is really a fair situation. She might not mind. We'll see how she feels about it. But what we have available for you on the library webpage is a set of databases that you can get into and search for things that you're interested in. You can also use Google Scholar, but Google Scholar doesn't have quite as broad a remit maybe as some of the databases. I'm not sure, I haven't used Google Scholar much. So there are several databases that are really specifically useful for us as HPE, kinesiology, whatever we're called now, people, right? And she has also very kindly made us our own little resource page that lists the journals that are good to use and things like that. When you're in the database, you can search by subject, by journal title, by author, okay? Lots of options in the database, and some of them have a little box you can click so that they only look for peer-reviewed journal articles, which is a brilliant tool because now I don't have to worry about whether it was peer-reviewed or not, right? Because the database did that for me. So I really like that little box. It saves a lot of trouble. Otherwise, you've got a journal, and if you don't know for certain, you have to go digging around and find out, which is a pain in the neck, right? If you come across an article that you cannot open, either on the internet or within the database, don't pay. You'll quite often get to an article and they'll give you maybe the whole abstract or just the first few lines of the abstract and some key terms, and then they'll say, oh, if you want access to this, you have to pay us $40 and you get 2 hours, right? Don't go there. Don't ever pay. Because Eastern has a super setup for students. I was at a Research One university and we didn't get free access to articles, okay? So this is a really cool deal for you guys. They have an interlibrary loan system. You'll have to log in and create a password. And then once you've got a login, you can go to the interlibrary loan, put in the information for the article that you found, send it off to the library, and they'll find it for you and give it to you for free. It's very cool. Now, having said that, my hope is that we don't abuse the system because they don't charge you. It's very easy. And you may not have experienced this yet, but when you get into these databases and you start looking for research, it's real easy to go off on tangents all over the place because everything becomes interesting, right? You're just like, oh wow, what's that article? Oh wow, what's that? And then it's really easy to go, oh, well, I want all those articles and shove them into interlibrary loan. But that's kind of a waste of their resources. You could get away with that, but please don't. Just order the articles that you really want to read that are relevant to the work that you're doing within the class, either this class or another class, okay? But yeah, if you find a book that you can't get access to. They can quite often, you can also order book pages or book chapters, right? Sometimes a whole book, okay? Plan ahead for that. If you're ordering a well-known journal and the article is easily available within New Mexico at UNM or NMSU or Highlands or somewhere else, then they can often get that article back to you the following day or within 2 days. But if the article you want is not available within New Mexico and they have to go searching off around the country to try to find a university that's willing to share that article, then it can take a bit longer to get hold of. Okay? So make sure that you take that into account, because I wouldn't, because I'm mean, I don't know what Dr. Guerra's view and Dr. Yun's view and Dr. Liu's view would be, but if you came to me the day of a deadline and said, oh, I'm not ready to hand this work in because my article still hasn't arrived, I would say, tough doo-doo, you should have planned ahead. Okay? So, like I said, those kinds of things, I think you have to be organised in grad school. You've got to lay out what's, what work is due when, what do I need, and get on top of it. You can't be leaving things until the last minute like we all did in undergrad. Okay, that doesn't work. Okay. So, APA citations. So, difference between citation and the reference. The citation is within the body of your paper, right? So, you're going to use someone's data or someone's conclusion within your argument to support what you're trying to say. And you would have to cite those authors and the year of the paper, okay? The reference, the format for the reference is what we use at the end of the paper in the reference list or the bibliography, okay? So the citations, in the same way as I talked about last week with the references, you can't just learn one version of a citation and use that all the time, because it depends on what it is you're citing. So is it a book? Is it a journal article? Is it an online resource? Does it have one author or two authors or 5 authors? Right? The way that you cite changes under all those circumstances. So I'm going to say the same thing I said last week. Don't bother trying to learn them. Just carry your APA manual with you all the time, right? And thumb citations and references. Put extra. I mean, as I said, I like the new version, the new edition, because they put the coloured edges on the paper, so it's easy to see, and you'll learn which colour is which item. Or put extra stickies in. It doesn't matter, it's your book, you can do what you like, right? So, pages 253 to 258, I think it is chapter 8. There's citations. Yes, chapter 8 is all about citations. Okay? So the first part of the chapter is trying to explain when you do it and why you do it a certain way. And then there are 10 pages there that give you very detailed examples of the rules for the citation. Okay? So as I said, don't try to learn it. Just, the thing I think that you need to know, that you need to learn is, I have to check the APA manual for everything. Right? I just do, because there's so many rules. Now, at the master's level, I think the majority of faculty are not going to ding you for things like putting the comma in the wrong place within the paper. But I think everybody expects the references to be formatted correctly. Okay? But if you do, if you are including some statistical information and you don't italicize something that should be italicized, I don't think at the master's level that a faculty member is going to take off points unless the entire paper is full of glaring errors, right? Then maybe they would, but I don't know. But a reference, like we're going to do at the top of our article summaries and will go in your bibliography or your reference list, I think that's important to get right, right? So, and the citations, it's important that you use them at the right time. If it were me and you used one author instead of 4 authors, I would probably make a little note on the side and say, you know, go back and check your formatting for this citation. It's not only one author on this paper, but I don't think I would take points away for that. Okay? Questions to this point? Everyone can hear me, right?
Brad, we can.
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. Okay. All right. Onward and upwards then. So, what I'm trying to do in the next couple of slides is to give you some examples of some of the things that have rules governing them to make you start thinking about just referencing your APA manual all the time. Okay? So it's not just the reference and the citation. There are a ton of rules around punctuation. Okay? So I've got the page numbers there for you. And interestingly, in the 7th edition, we've gone back to space once after a, what is it called? A period, right? That was the rule when I did my dissertation on edition 5. Edition 6, they decided to make it space twice. I can't remember the space twice when I've spent 4 years spacing one, right? It took me like 3 years to remember to space twice. Now, they've gone back to spacing once. I don't know why. Who knows? There's no logic. Don't try to find any logic in the rules. Just follow the rules, okay? Commas. So, depending how old you are, and what your English teacher was like at school, you may or may not have learned to put a comma in a list, and then before the last item of the list, and you've got the and, you don't put the comma in before the and. But in APA, you do put the comma in, right? And I say age because when I was in school, we were taught to put a comma in. Then when I went to college, we were told there shouldn't be a comma. That's not grammatically correct, or whatever the word is. And now APA wants a comma. Okay? Again, I don't expect a faculty member at the master's level, possibly if you write a thesis. But I don't think in a class paper, anyone is going to take off marks because you did or did not remember about the comma. Okay? what I'm trying to point out to you is the kind of silly rules that are there in that book that you have to start looking at. Okay? What else have we got? So we've got punctuation, spelling. Who knew? Spelling and abbreviations. So there are a few pages on some spelling rules and hyphenation rules. So if it's Mrs. Jones Brown, is there a space after Jones before the hyphen and a space after the hyphen before Brown? Or do they all go to, right? You can't learn it. I mean, you'd have to have a brain the size of the classroom. Well, I did have a lecturer who almost knew it backwards, but he was a little odd. He was a lot of fun, but he was a little strange. Abbreviation rules. Under the abbreviation rules, you'll find how you should abbreviate units of measurement, like inches, yards, miles, kilometers, right? And also how you should abbreviate time. So day, week, minute, month, year, things like that. Okay? So within those 4 pages, you've got the rules for the units of measurement. All right? And then we've also got quite a lot of pages about the formatting of numbers and the formatting of statistical symbols. Okay? So let me give you a brief example on the numbers. If the number is between 1 and 10, then you write that number out. Unless it's like in 5 days' time, then you wouldn't write it out. You could put a 5. And so this is why you can't learn it, because they're very confusing. They're not even consistent, right? If it's over 10, you don't write it out. You put the numerical number. Unless it's the first thing in the sentence. So, for example, on last week's practice paper, there were 32 participants. And some of you started your participants row with 32 students who were, right, and you wrote the number 32. But if the number is at the beginning of the sentence, it doesn't matter how small or how big it is, you have to write it out. Okay? That can be quite an interesting practice of rejigging your sentences, because if you've got a really big number, you don't want to write that whole big number out. A, it uses a lot of words, and B, it's just a pain, right? So can I rearrange this sentence and move the number into the sentence, and then I can just write the number? Does that make sense? So, lots and lots of different rules. Don't try to learn them, please. You will blow up your brains. Okay. Any questions on the APA or the library or anything like that before I start reviewing the template setup? Pardon me. All right. So as I said, I'm only about halfway through, and the way I like to do it is to tackle the first few boxes on every paper so that I'm as consistent as possible when I'm grading the same item, and then go back and grade the next few boxes on every paper. So there's a lot of you in this class this semester. So I'm about halfway through the first 4 or 5 boxes. So one of the things I've noticed is that I think most of you so far did not stick to the 2 line per row rule. Okay? I know you can type more than 2 lines in a row because it's a Word document and I can't stop that. There's no way of blocking it that I know of anyway. But I don't want you to type more than 2 lines in one row of the table because your word limit is 300, right? And the table is set up to try to help you to keep under that 300 word limit. All right? So if you just start gaily typing away, you're going to end up at 400 words and there'll be a pretty hefty deduction. Right? And you might think, and there I'm not being mean, although you may think I'm being mean, but if I submit an abstract to a conference and the conference criteria tell me that abstract has to be 200 words or less, and I send in an abstract that is 280 words, do you know what happens to that abstract? It goes in the bin. Okay? So I'm not actually being mean in this particular instance because the word limit is there for a reason. Right? You have to learn to be able to summarize and synthesize research papers that you're reading. You can't just regurgitate the whole paper. That's not an option. All right? So the reason for the 2 lines per row and the 300 word limit is to kind of channel you into summarizing the key points of the paper. Remember last week that I said the abstract is already a summary, it's the author's summary of their paper, right? So it's cheating to take your summary from the abstract, right? Now you're not doing the work of learning how to summarize the paper. So what I want you to do is ignore the abstract, black it out with marker or tear it off the paper if you, whatever. Do not use the abstract, right? You have to learn to be able to find this information within the body of the paper for yourself. Okay? We'll come back to the reference I did because I want to do an example for you. I don't think anybody no one that I have read so far made the error of alphabetizing the authors within the list of authors, so that was really good. Okay, a couple of you didn't do this, so I know I gave a big spiel about plagiarism and you have to be able to reword things and synthesize and do all this, but for the purpose and the conclusion, you are allowed to copy and paste the exact sentence from the paper into the template. Only for those 2 rows, right? The purpose statement and the conclusion. Again, I have a good reason for that. And the reason is that I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, but many of you have very little research background or even reading research papers as a background. And if you start trying to rephrase the purpose of the study you may accidentally make it into something it isn't, right? And the same with the conclusion. It's important to use the author's words for the conclusion at this point. Because if you try to rephrase it, you may put words in their mouth, and it might not be what they actually said. Okay? So all the other boxes, the participants, the procedures, the results, those you want to do your best to try to read the paper and reword that, right? Pick out the highlights and try to put that together in your own words. But don't worry about it for the purpose, for the problem, and for the conclusion. Type of article, right? So far, everyone has that right. Everyone has said it's a quantitative article. Yay. It's an empirical article. Data was collected. And it's a quantitative empirical article. So, well done on that one. The design and method, most people have done a really good job with this, and that's a tricky box to do, right? I think this is the most difficult box on the template, personally, right? Because what you're trying to work out, the design, you want to think of the design as the plan for the data and collection, particularly in a quantitative paper, it's quite clear. Qualitative, it can get a bit murky. But in a quantitative study, what will happen is the researchers will sit down and they'll say, okay, these are my variables, and this is the measurement tool I'm going to use for these variables. And this is the question. Now, how do I answer the question using these variables? How many times do I have to measure them? Am I just going to observe them? Or am I going to actually get a tape measure and measure things? And is it going to be a questionnaire? Right? Or a survey? Is it a pre-post design? Or that's also called a repeated measures design? And almost all of you got that it was a pre-post design. So that was really well done, okay? Is the analysis between subjects or within subjects? Now, you wouldn't identify that just yet, because we haven't talked about it. So let me explain that. That means that let me go back to last week's example of the strength training program, right? So I've got program A and program B. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my participant pool and I'm going to divide them between program A and program B. So when I test these people, I've got options for how I look at that data. Depends on what it is I want to know, right? Do I want to know whether program A or program B was better? Then I would have to compare the results from program A with the results from program B. That would be a between subjects analysis, right? Because I'm comparing the people in group B and the people in group A. Or do I want to know, or do I also want to know, right? Depends on the study, how much improvement program A made and how much improvement program B made. So then I'm going to look at the people in group B at the beginning, and then I'm going to look at the people in group B at the end and compare them. That's a within subjects analysis. have to yell at me if you need me to A, either slow down or B, repeat something. All right, because I'm looking at a camera, I can't see your faces. Okay.
You're doing a great job.
Sorry?
I said you're doing a great job. I'm right with you.
I'm doing a great job, thank you so much. Okay, all right. The participant row. So, you may have a paper that goes into great detail about all these participants. But your job when you're summarizing is to look at what characteristics did the participants have to have that identified them with the purpose statement. Okay? So on the paper last week, the purpose statement did not mention that it was going to look at sex, males versus females. Right? It was just looking at students who were only recreationally active. Okay? So, although the paper tells you that 16 of the 32 were males and 16 of the 32 were females, you don't necessarily have to highlight that information in a summary unless you have word space to do so, and then it's okay, right? If you're not going over your word limit, then by all means, tell the reader that there were 16 of each sex, right? But that's not a key point given their purpose, right? Now, you might find when you get to the analysis and the results section that they actually did look at the difference between males and females. Now what do I do? I go back to my purpose. The purpose said 32 students. So the males versus females, whilst it's really interesting, is not the key point of the results. Right? Because the key point of the results is, did the addition of the stretching make any difference? Right? Another thing I saw was that some people identified that these students were in Hawaii. Again, that's not wrong. It's not wrong. It just depends, do I have enough words to waste words telling people that the students were in Hawaii? Because did being in Hawaii really impact the results? It's a student population who are recreationally active. I'm not sure that it would have made any difference if they were in Timbuktu. Right? Now, if you're looking at a paper that is talking about outdoor play, right? Now, the environment that those participants are in might make a difference, right? Because if I'm running a study on outdoor play in North Dakota, and I'm running a study on outdoor play in Miami Beach, do you think that environment made a difference to the results I found? Right? So these are the kinds of things. What are the characteristics about the participants that made them the right choice for this study? Okay. Okay, that's where I stopped on the one. Sorry, go on. Did you have a question? No? Okay. So the participants is where I've stopped to date. So I don't know what your procedures are looking like yet. But the procedures really is a recipe list of what was done, right? If there was an instrument involved, so if it says, oh, we gave them a survey, do they name the survey or did they create the survey, right? Because if I'm going into a database and I'm putting in keywords to try to find an article, and what I want to know is articles that use the TGMD to analyze motor skills in children, then I need to know that they use the TGMD, right? That's important because there are lots of different motor skill assessments. And I don't want to waste my time reaming through articles that aren't relevant to what I'm looking for, okay? So again, go back to the purpose. What are the procedures that they did that relate directly to the purpose statement? All right? And it's a recipe. Point 1, they did this. Point 2, they did this. Right? So, did they mail the surveys off to their participants, or did they bring the participants in to do the survey in the classroom? Right? That's quite an interesting point from a research point of view, because when you mail out surveys, the attrition rate is huge. Right? So if they mailed them out and they still got 150 participants, goodness knows how many of those things they mailed out. Okay? The data analysis, remember, is not the software package. The software package is irrelevant. What we need to know is which statistical test was run on the data that relates to the variables identified in the purpose. So again, don't get sidetracked on last week with the t-test or the ANOVA that was run to find out whether males or females improved more. Because that's not a key point for the purpose. Right? We want to look at the key variables in the purpose and find the analysis that was run on the data for those variables. And then when you get to the results section, if you've done the data analysis section well, and you've managed to highlight the correct set of analyses, then all you've got to do is report the results for those analyses and ignore all the other results that are in the paper. Okay. As I said earlier, the conclusion you can use exactly as it's stated in the article. One sentence, you've got to find, there should be one sentence where they say exactly what they think they found. Right? And there should be one sentence that says, this is why we ran the study. This is what we were interested in.
I lost audio when I tried or the ability to talk when I tried to unmute earlier. I apologize. question was, or was going to be, so we're trying to minimize the quantity of words here.
Yeah.
And it feels like a silly question, but are we still looking to have like complete thoughts or complete sentences then
Yes.
in each subheading or in each
Yeah,
area?
it's got to be grammatically correct sentences.
Okay.
But the more practice you get, the better you get at cutting a word here or there. It's amazing when you get to the point where you're at, like, your limit is 200 and you're at 204. You're like racking your brains how to get rid of 4 words, you know. But you can do it. It just takes, you just have to be a little creative sometimes. It has to be proper English, grammatically correct. Yeah. And that's why I'm at 300 to begin with. And that doesn't include the reference, right? The 300 is all the other boxes. Because even getting them down to 300 can be challenging, right? After midterm, we're going to cut it a little bit more. It'll get a bit smaller. Not too much smaller, but...
Right. Is there, I guess, an easy way to think of results versus conclusions? Like results, is that just, here's what the data says, and conclusions is, this is what we've decided in our study? Is that, I mean...
Yeah, and sometimes the conclusion is a little bit lazy, and it almost repeats the verbiage that was in the results section. Sometimes the results can be, you know, very varied and interesting, and then there'll be one sentence in the discussion. Some journals actually have a conclusion subheading. Often the conclusion is under the discussion subheading that will say, and it will be phrased in a similar way to the purpose, but it will say, this is what we think we found.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem. And, you know, it's difficult to be kind to yourself in this process, but you have to remember that for most of you, this is your first or second semester, that you haven't had a lot of experience at doing this yet. And if you were working with your child in school, or with, you know, your own child, or you were working with your athletes or something, you wouldn't expect them to just do this right straight away, okay? So I think it's really important that you try to be kind. You know, we're all in movement. That makes us all a little bit competitive, either with ourselves or with other people. And we tend to expect a lot of ourselves. And then it gets more difficult because there's a grade involved, right? And you want the grade. And so it's real easy to get tough on yourself here. You've got to give yourself these first few weeks to learn the ropes, to get the idea of what this is about. If you look at the syllabus, you will see that the grade for the papers that we're going to be doing over the next few weeks is minimal compared to the grade for the semester. Most of the grade comes after midterm. On purpose, right? Because right now, you're learning something you don't know how to do. Why would I make that 50% of your grade? Doesn't make any sense, right? So, hopefully I'm not talking to deaf ears. Try really hard to take a deep breath and just go, okay, this is harder than I thought it was going to be. I'm just going to keep plugging away at it. I'm going to keep asking questions. I'm just keep going. Okay, where are we? 25 to 6. Wow. we're early. So would it help if I did a reference example on the whiteboard? Would that be useful?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Okay, let's see if let's have a look and see what articles I've got floating around on my USB. Folder that says articles, there we go. Okay, PE and Academic Performance 2008, that looks like a good one. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is show it to you. And then I'll have a go at making a fool of myself and trying to get the reference right. Okay, can we make that a bit bigger? Is there a way to make that bigger? What's that? I thought there was a way of making it bigger. Okay. All right, so let's have a look here. What have we got? We have the journal title at the top up here, International Journal of Behavioral Nutrition and Physical Activity. We have the title of the paper. We have 2 authors. We have in very small print down here that it was published in February 2008. We do not have page numbers, but we do have that it's page 1 of 12. So what would be useful, I wonder if on open access they have no page numbers, or, oh, and there's a DOI. Good stuff. It would help if it was bigger though. Okay. All right, let me make a start. Let me close that out. And open a whiteboard. We want text. Let's have a colour we can actually see. Okay, I probably should open it up to have a look at it. As I'm going on. Okay, Trudeau F, Shepherd RJ, here we go. X. Okay. So, Trudeau, comma, F, period, and Shepherd, comma, R, space, J. Okay. And then, because I haven't done any for a while, I would have to go and check myself, because I suspect there should be a comma after the period for the first author. We have a Luke. Yes, I think so. 2 authors. Reference examples. Yes, there we go. So there should be the comma there. Then the next item after the authors is the year that the paper was published. So we know that was 2008. Period, space. And the next item is the title. So I'm just going to go and have a look at that. Go away. You're not helping me. There we go. Physical education, comma, school physical activity, comma. I'll have to come back. Physical. Now, one of the errors that some of you made was you capitalized every word in the title, right? You only capitalize the first word, a name of something, or if there's a colon or a semicolon, you capitalize the first word after the colon. All right? So it isn't physical education with a capital E, it's physical education with a lowercase e. Physical activity. Sorry, and then I'm going to have to go and have a look again. School physical activity, yikes. School sports and academic performance. So physical education, school, oh, and that's not how you spell physical. I can't type, I can't see the keyboard. It's so dark in it. Oh, it's going to make me have... All right, I don't want a new box every time I'm typing. All right, the school goes in before physical. Physical, we're going to spell properly. No, it won't let me. One of the things to note, for example, on this title, they do not have a comma before the and. So that would be something in the new edition that I would have to go and check, because I'm not sure whether we would put the comma in. I think certainly in previous editions you would add a comma, even though there isn't a comma on the actual paper. This is so annoying. School sports and academic performance. See if I can get all that in one box. School sports and academic performance. So what I think is, period, that, as I said, in the previous editions of the APA manual, even though there isn't a comma before that and, you would need to go back and put one in, because they're telling us in the punctuation rules that we have to have a comma before the and. Okay? You have to indent the second line. So the second line is going to start, this is going to look a bit of a mess, people, sorry. I'll see if I can get as much of this done in one box as I can. It was the International Journal of Physical, I can't remember the title, but I don't want to look because then I'll lose this box. Okay, now, the journal title is italicized. All right, I don't know how to do that here. So this box would be italicized, and at the end of the journal title is a comma, and then you would put the volume number. Okay? So, because it's an online journal, let's see if anywhere it gives us a volume number. We might have to go check it. There may not be a volume number. There we go, it's at the top of the page there. So, it's volume 5, issue 10. So, the volume number is also italicized. So this 5 would be italicized. And then you open brackets and you put the issue number, close brackets, comma, and the brackets and the issue number are not italicized. Okay? I told you the rules are kind of illogical. I'm not sure that any other formatting manual is more logical than APA. I think they're all a little crazy. Okay, so the title, International Journal of Physical Activity, blah, 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 whatever it was, would be italicized. The 5 would be italicized. The bracket and the 10 are not italicized, comma, space, page number. Now, the page number here is interesting because on the downloaded copy, they've only told us that there are 12 pages. So the best thing to do is to go back to the original source, see if you can go back to the original online issue 10, and see if it gives it page numbers. If it does, great, you can put them there. If it doesn't, then I would take the comma out and put your period there. That period would normally come after the page numbers. Okay? Then the next item is the DOI. And the new edition has a lot of detail about this DOI. I read through it a couple of times today. I have to say I found it a little confusing, so I'm going to be reading it a few more times. So, chapter 9.34, it's on page 298, when to include DOIs and URLs. And there are some rules there about when you do and don't. So this is quite different to edition 6. The thing that is really different is that they want you to use a hyperlink now, not just type the DOI. They want you to make the DOI into a hyperlink, so that even if the journal you're taking the DOI from didn't have it as a hyperlink because it's a couple of years old, they specifically state to turn it into a hyperlink, and they tell you how to do that. Okay? So that's really new, because that means now that if I pull up an electronic copy of any paper, all I have to do is click on that to get to a reference, instead of going all the way through the library databases trying to find this paper, right? So that's quite a big difference. The next section is the formatting of DOIs and URLs. So then they tell you specifically how to format that, all right? There are very few instances, there are some, but there's not many that I could find, that where they say you don't need to bother with a DOI or a URL. Okay? So most of the time, you're going to want to have, after your page numbers, either a URL because there isn't a DOI, or a DOI that you've turned into a hyperlink. Don't put a period at the end of the DOI or the URL, because that might change how that information is interpreted, and it could bring up an error to the person clicking on it. Okay? Sorry, the text feature in the whiteboard wasn't as helpful as I was expecting it to be, so I'm not sure how good that example really was. But hopefully it helped a little bit. One thing you can do, and I will do my best to get it back to you, is if you have a go at the reference and you want to send it to me and get feedback on the mistakes or whether it's correct, you can certainly do that, right? give it a go and chuck it to me in an email. Make sure that in the title of the email you say it's a draft, so I know that it's something I've got to look at and try to get back to you as quickly as I can. Because I really don't have very much free time this semester for grading or collecting data or anything, so it's going to be quite an interesting semester. But I'm going to do my best to stay on top of things. So yeah, if you want to send me a draft, either of the whole thing or even of just the first couple of boxes or whatever you've done, please do. And as I said, I'll do my best to get it back to you as quickly as I can with some feedback on it. And again, remember, these initial papers are not worth very much grade. Deliberately, right? Because this is, it's hard, you know. I mean, I kind of jumble around and things, but I've been doing this for a very long time, right? So, 20 years now. So, I should probably know a little bit more than I do, really. But here. Okay, questions? All right, so look out on your Blackboard grade book for your papers. I'm going to try to get them back tomorrow, but I have to prioritize my evaluation file because I'm already late, and that has to go through several layers of process. So I've got to get that in, and then I will go back to your papers. So hopefully tomorrow or Saturday morning. I will return them in the grade book, so I don't know what you can see when you open your grade book, but somewhere there will be an attachment with my feedback in it. Okay? All right, it's time for a glass of wine. Absolutely. It's been a long day. Start reading the next paper, have a little play with it. Don't submit anything on the next paper until you have had the feedback for the practice paper, all right? And if for some reason I do not get the practice paper back to you when I'm expecting to, I will extend the deadline for the next assignment, okay? So you don't need to worry about that. All right, I'm not going to hold you to a deadline if I'm being tardy. So, yeah, I think that's it for this evening then. Okay, email me if you've got questions, whatever. Or put questions into the discussion board because everybody will have questions. And have a good evening.